In this video, we're going to talk about data, memory, variables, and types. So first off, we're just going to talk about data, memory, and variables and how to think about those things. And then in the next video, we'll talk about types. And then in the third video, we'll talk about how to issue the commands in Java that will allow you to define, initialize, and modify and view the values of variables. Okay, so first off, data. Data is just the information that you need to store inside the computer. So quantities, characters, symbols on which operations are performed by a computer. So you'll need to store in the process of running your program, you'll need to save some information, keep some information in there. And then you'll need to take that information and do stuff to it or stuff with it. And so that's what we're talking about in terms of data. So programs, like I said, programs will need to be able to store data for later access. And data can be stored temporarily in the computer's random access memory, or RAM. So here's a picture of some RAM chips. This is an old picture, but anyway, you get the point. There's some slots on the motherboard, and these RAM chips just kind of sit right in there. And they're just fancy circuits that allow you to store information in there. Okay. If you want, if the machine were powered off, then all of the data stored in those chips would be gone. You couldn't access that again. So it's really just kind of temporary storage. If you want more persistent storage, then what you would have to do is generally save some information to a drive in your computer, a hard disk or solid state drive, something like that. A flash drive, something so that it will persist across reboots and things like that. All right, so thinking about memory, we don't really have to worry about the hardware details, but in your mind, you need to have some framework for thinking about memory. And so I generally just think about memory as a collection of cubby holes. So something like a mailboxes that you might see in the offices on campus, where you can stick pieces of paper in there, and they have, say, an instructor's name on there, and you can just put information in there. So in my mind, that's kind of how I think about memory and storage, as a collection of numbered cubby holes. That analogy only goes so far, though, because unlike real cubby holes, each of those memory cubby holes can only hold one piece of information. You might see like a cubby hole with a bunch of paper stuffed inside it in some of the offices, but you can't really think about the computer memory like that. Just think about a cubby hole holds one piece of information, and if you want to put another piece of information into the cubby hole, then you're going to have to take what was in there and do something else with it, put it someplace else, because each cubby hole will only hold one piece of information at a time. I said the cubby holes were numbered, and so the numbers for the cubby holes are sequences of zeros and ones, just like the machine language instructions that we talked about in a previous video. That's the numbers, how they're numbered with big long strings of zeros and ones. Again, that's difficult for humans to deal with. Okay, so that brings us to variables and what they are. Variables are a mechanism by which the programs that you write, are able to use the computer's memory. So our definition of variable will be: a variable is a named location in memory. So it's one of those cubby holes that you assign a more friendly, human-friendly name to. So you can think of a variable as a memory cubby hole with both a label and a number. So the numbers that the computer uses, the long strings of zeros and ones, are not good for humans. So to use a variable, we'll put a human-friendly name on the label, and that just makes it easier for humans to use. All right, so I have a picture over here. Let's take a look at it of the typical setup. So over here we see a bunch of cubby holes inside. Okay. Most of these are blank. There's nothing in them. Up here we can see how they're numbered, And now I said they use long strings of zeros and ones, but just to simplify the writing of this diagram, they just used regular numbers here. But those are the what are called the memory addresses. Those are the numbers of the cubbyhole. On one of these particular memory addresses here at 1004, it's been given a variable name, and so that the variable name here is rate, and so that's a more human-friendly name to use. So you don't have to remember the memory address, which is really a big long number. You can just say, hey, look at the variable rate, and the computer will know that that is referencing this cubbyhole, this memory address right here, 1004. So the computer can continue to think about the memory addresses how it wants to, and you can think about how the memory addresses how you want to with a human-friendly name. In this particular variable, there's been a value that's been put inside there, and that's the value, the number 100. So for whatever reason, say this programmer wanted to save that value of 100 in this variable called rate for later use inside the program. Okay, so that's kind of how we'll think about in our minds about memory addresses. All right, again, I already gave this away, but the value of a variable, right, is the piece of data, if there is one, that is stored inside of a variable. Okay. All right, so data, right, to get stored in the computer's memory. That's data that you need to use in the course of your program running, and the way that we do that from a program is through the use of variables, right? A variable is a named location in memory. Okay, so that's it for this video. In the next video, we are going to talk about types of variables.